In the aftermath of the failed coup against President Ibrahim Traoré, the landscape of Burkina Faso's foreign relations has shifted dramatically. What was intended to destabilize his rule, to discredit him in the eyes of the international community, and to isolate him from the rest of the world, has only strengthened Traoré's grip on power. The coup plot, orchestrated by General Langley, was meant to bring down Traoré's regime. Instead, it has catapulted Burkina Faso into the global spotlight and solidified the president's authority both domestically and internationally. Contrary to expectations, Traoré has not faced the fallout of this attempt. Instead, he has gained unprecedented support from across Africa and even from unexpected corners of the world. It is not just ordinary citizens who have rallied behind him. Entire nations have stepped up to affirm their backing. Cuba, a longtime ally, has reaffirmed its historical solidarity with Burkina Faso, but it is the shift from nations like Denmark that raises the most eyebrows. Once highly critical of the military junta, Denmark is now reopening its diplomatic doors to Burkina Faso, signaling a profound shift in its foreign policy. The message is clear: the world is watching, and the West may no longer hold the same sway it once did. This international recalibration raises critical questions. Why are countries once distanced from Burkina Faso returning to the table? What does this reveal about the growing influence of Traoré, and what does it say about the changing dynamics of global power? This video seeks to examine how a failed coup attempt may have done more to reshape Burkina Faso's foreign relations than any diplomatic summit or carefully crafted speech ever could. In the wake of the failed coup, President Traoré has not only survived but thrived, commanding respect on the global stage and challenging long-established power structures. In August 2024, Denmark made a bold decision that would later prove to be a miscalculation. The Scandinavian country announced it would close its embassies in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, citing the instability caused by military coups in these nations. The official narrative framed this move as part of a broader strategy to realign Denmark's diplomatic focus, opening new missions in Senegal, Tunisia, and Rwanda. The official line seemed neutral enough, even pragmatic. However, a closer look reveals the true motivation behind Denmark's withdrawal from the Sahel, a political maneuver aimed at signaling loyalty to the West and distancing itself from countries pivoting away from Western influence. At the heart of this decision was Burkina Faso's growing alliance with Russia, China, and other Eastern powers. In the eyes of Western nations, these realignments were seen as betrayals, a rejection of the long-standing Western partnership. Denmark's embassy closures were not about logistical concerns or regional instability. They were about signaling disapproval of Burkina Faso's shift towards non-Western alliances. Denmark, like many other European nations, aimed to apply pressure on President Traoré, hoping that diplomatic isolation would force him to reconsider his alignment with Russia and China. However, the Western powers misjudged the situation. Instead of buckling under pressure, Traoré remained resolute, continuing to pursue his country's independence from Western influence. While many expected him to be swayed by diplomatic isolation, he showed remarkable strength and determination, refusing to bend to foreign pressure. The narrative being painted by Western powers that Burkina Faso and its neighbors were unstable, isolated, and in need of Western intervention began to unravel. In an unexpected twist, Denmark failed to follow through with its decision. Despite its announcement to close the embassy, the Danish mission in Ouagadougou remained operational. No significant steps were taken to shut it down, signaling a shift in Denmark's approach to Burkina Faso. Behind closed doors, the political and economic realities of the Sahel region forced Denmark to reassess its position. Europe's increasing reliance on Africa, not just for resources but for strategic positioning, became undeniable. Denmark's hesitation to sever ties with Burkina Faso is not just about diplomacy, it is about dependence. For years, Africa has been painted as a passive recipient of aid, a continent dependent on the goodwill of Western powers. But with the rise of countries like Burkina Faso, the truth is being exposed. Africa is no longer a mere pawn in the global power game. It is a player in its own right, and the West can no longer afford to ignore its growing influence. The shift in Denmark's position is a clear acknowledgement of this reality. Europe, and particularly Denmark, cannot afford to lose influence in a region that is rapidly gaining geopolitical importance. Africa's natural resources, burgeoning markets, and young population make it a key player in the 21st century global order. Denmark's diplomatic reset with Burkina Faso is a tacit recognition of this new reality. Africa is no longer begging for Western validation. It is demanding respect on its own terms. As Denmark quietly re-engages with Burkina Faso, the West's grip on Africa is slipping. It is no longer about applying pressure through diplomatic isolation. It is about recalibrating relationships to reflect Africa's growing power and sovereignty. Countries like Burkina Faso are no longer seen as weak or unstable. They are asserting their autonomy and defining their future on their own terms. Following the failed coup attempt, it became increasingly clear that President Ibrahim Traoré was not simply surviving. He was gaining ground on the international stage. Denmark's hesitant diplomatic reset was only the beginning. Other Western nations, including Germany, were forced to reconsider their stance on Burkina Faso. Germany, a key player in the European Union, initially condemned Traoré's rise to power following the lead of France. Diplomatic ties were suspended, and the message from Berlin was clear: relations would only be restored once Burkina Faso transitioned back to civilian rule. However, this diplomatic pressure, much like Denmark's, proved ineffective. Instead of bending to Western demands, Burkina Faso stood firm, much like the military leaders of Mali and Niger, who refused to submit to the pressure of Western powers. The West miscalculated. What they saw as a threat to democracy was viewed by Traoré as an assertion of sovereignty. Burkina Faso did not bend to the will of its former colonial masters. And in the end, it was Germany, not Burkina Faso, that had to reconsider its approach. In a rare moment of diplomatic honesty, Germany's Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development, Svenja Schulze, admitted something that was hard to ignore. Most of the world's population lives under non-democratic governments, and Germany had no choice but to accept this reality. This candid acknowledgement marked a shift in Germany's foreign policy. As the geopolitical tug-of-war between East and West intensifies, Germany understood that abandoning the Sahel region would leave it vulnerable to Russian influence. In other words, Germany was not just concerned about Burkina Faso's governance, it was concerned about losing ground to Russia and China. The moral high ground that Western nations had once claimed in their foreign policy toward Africa was now a luxury they could no longer afford. The reality is stark. Africa no longer needs Europe. It never did. What has become clear is that Africa's resources, strategic positioning, and growing economic potential make it a key player on the world stage. The West's failure to acknowledge this truth has forced nations like Germany to recalibrate their foreign policy. Burkina Faso's defiance of Western pressure has forced Europe to confront a new power dynamic, one that recognizes African nations as equals, not just subjects of Western influence. While Denmark and Germany have hesitated, Cuba's position has been unwavering. Unlike the diplomatic back and forth of European nations, Cuba has remained a steadfast ally of Burkina Faso, a relationship that spans decades. Cuba's support for President Ibrahim Traoré after the failed coup was not born out of necessity, but out of a shared ideological commitment to anti-imperialist struggle and sovereignty. Cuba's Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez wasted no time in reaffirming his country's solidarity with Burkina Faso after the coup attempt failed. Unlike the Western powers that viewed the coup as a destabilizing event, Cuba viewed it as an opportunity to strengthen its bonds with Burkina Faso. Cuba's loyalty to Burkina Faso is rooted in history, specifically in the revolutionary solidarity between Cuba and the late Thomas Sankara, the iconic leader of Burkina Faso who was inspired by Fidel Castro and the Cuban Revolution. In fact, Cuba's support for Burkina Faso is not new. For over 40 years, Cuba has been a reliable partner in areas like healthcare, education, and regional cooperation. The two countries have long shared a commitment to challenging Western dominance, and Cuba has consistently stood with Burkina Faso in the face of external pressure. When Cuban Foreign Minister Rodriguez visited Burkina Faso after the failed coup attempt, it was not just a diplomatic gesture. It was a reaffirmation of the shared struggle for sovereignty and self-determination. Cuba's relationship with Burkina Faso goes beyond politics. It is built on mutual respect, a shared vision of justice, and a refusal to bow to imperial pressures. Cuba's ongoing investment in Burkina Faso, in areas like healthcare, biotechnology, and renewable energy, demonstrates the depth of this commitment. In the world of geopolitics, where alliances are often transactional and driven by self-interest, Cuba's support for Burkina Faso stands out as a rare example of true solidarity. Cuba has not just supported Burkina Faso politically, it has offered tangible, sustainable partnerships that empower the country to grow and thrive on its own terms. Unlike Western nations, which often attach strings to their aid, Cuba has shown Burkina Faso that cooperation does not have to come at the expense of sovereignty. Ibrahim Traoré didn't wait for permission to lead. He rose, and the people followed. Through their unwavering loyalty, he claimed a power no foreign hand could ever bestow. What do you think about Traoré's rise? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if this moved you, hit like, share it far and wide, and let the world know what's unfolding.